Am I the asshole for refusing to let my stepdaughter use my daughter's wedding dress? I met my stepdaughter Zoe 2.5 years ago, and I married her father less than 5 months ago. It was a small and private celebration since that's what we felt was the best thing to do, since I'm still grieving my daughter Lauren, who passed away from sepsis at the age of 26. She was doing okay and was getting ready for her wedding that was supposed to happen the same month she passed away. We still don't know what went wrong. I took most of her belongings, including her wedding dress. We bought it together and she put a lot of her own touches on it. Although it hurt to look at it, I made sure it's safe. My stepdaughter Zoe is younger than Lauren. She's 23. We're not very close and distance is one of the reasons why. The issue started when Zoe visited to talk about her wedding in April. We were talking about wedding dresses and she suddenly brought up Lauren's wedding dress. I asked her what about it, and she said she saw it several times and it got stuck on her mind. She asked me if she could see it and I let her. She then said she'd like to wear it at her wedding. I felt uneasy. I told her I wasn't sure that was a good idea. She told me it's fine. She'll have to change a few things in it so that it can fit her size and style, but this is why I had a hard time accepting. I told her I was sorry, but I can't let her have it. She offered me money, but its sentimental value is what matters to me. She argued, saying I was making things complicated and it was all right since she too is my daughter. She asked if I don't love her as much as my own daughter, and I told her my love for her is different, but she threw a fit, calling me unfair and unreasonable, and I still said no. Her dad got involved in the argument, saying he doesn't see why I'm against it. I declined to discuss it anymore, but they keep bringing it up, asking if my daughter would have wanted someone else to have the opportunity to wear this dress and she unfortunately couldn't. This made me so mad, I lashed out at both of them and kept saying no. Others said I had no right to act like that. What's the point of leaving the dress in the closet when my stepdaughter can make good memories in it? Am I the asshole for not wanting to give her the dress?
Story time about how my best friend got with my boyfriend. Whenever I was in 6th grade, my mom had put me in this summer camp. And that's where I met my best friend, Jenna. Well, any boys that I liked at summer camp, Jenna would try and go after them. So fast forward, Jenna and I never went to the same school, which was so nice because I could literally tell her about any guy that I liked and she would not know who the hell it was. Okay guys, real quick before we continue with this story time. Today's story time is sponsored by my favorite investing app called Public. With the app Public, I always know which stocks are trending and what my friends and other awesome people are investing in. So make sure to go click the link in my bio to start investing with as little as $1. Okay guys, back to the story. Well, I decided to invite her to my school's football game, the one that my boyfriend was going to be playing at. So I'm getting ready at my house and we're about to go pick her up, and she tells me that she's going to wear one of her dad's Hawaiian button-up shirts and some jean shorts. So I decided to wear the same thing because I didn't want her to feel uncomfortable because she never met anybody at my school before. Like for part 2. Story time about how my best friend got with my boyfriend part 2. Real quick, sorry this part is really late. TikTok would not let me post this video at all. So I pick her up and she's wearing a completely different outfit than what she told me she was wearing. And the whole time we were at the game, she was bothering me about who my boyfriend was. And because I knew she was a hoe, I definitely did not tell her who it was. Well, the one week I couldn't make it to one of my boyfriend's football games, and Jenna just decided to show up to my school's football games even though she didn't even fucking go there. Well, the one night she met my boyfriend. She texted me about it that night saying, oh, he's super cute, da-da-da-da-da. I asked my boyfriend what he thought of her, and he said that she was weird and she was hitting on all of his friends. So I thought I didn't have to worry about them getting together, right? Wrong. He had invited me to this party and said that I could bring her, so I decided why not give her the benefit of the doubt. Jenna and I had planned on leaving that night because my mom couldn't pick us up in the morning. Well, Jenna ended up spending the night, and I went back there in the morning, and there were hickeys all over my boyfriend's neck. Story time about how I crashed my dad's really expensive car. So a little background information. My mom had just got remarried to my stepdad 3 years ago, and he was this rich asshole who owned a bunch of food trucks and thought he was the shit. Well, at the time I also had a boyfriend. And we had only been dating for like a month and a half. But my boyfriend would always beg me to let him drive my stepdad's car. And I always said no because that was like his child. Like he had children. He could care less about them. His car was more important. Anyway, so the one weekend my parents are out of town, and one of my friends was throwing a graduation party. So that whole day my boyfriend was trying to talk me into taking the car, and I already knew where my stepdad hid the keys. So I just decided I wouldn't drink that night and I would just take the car. He kept asking me if he could drive, but clearly I said no, because this kid literally told me that he crashed the first 2 cars that he had. So we get to the party, we're having a good time, and one of my friends tells me that everybody's taking pictures with my car outside. Like for part 2. Part 2 about how I crashed my dad's very expensive car. So like I said, everybody's taking pictures of the car, but I decided to let it go at first. I mean, there was one point where I went outside just so that way I could kind of let everybody know, hey, you're taking pictures with my car. Well, half an hour later, my boyfriend and I decided to leave, and he's obliterated. Like, we probably got 50 feet from her house, and then I had to stop the car so that way he could get out and throw up. in somebody's yard. Anyway, so he gets in the car, we're on the way back to my house. And my house was like a 20-minute drive away. Well, we were 5 minutes from my house. At this one intersection, I get a green light and I go to make a right, and I accidentally hit a car turning out of the bar parking lot. So I'm literally freaking the fuck out. And my boyfriend's in the seat next to me crying for some reason. So the guy in the other car calls the cops. The cops show up, they call my stepdad and my mom. My boyfriend went to the hospital, he had alcohol poisoning. Well, my boyfriend told his mom that it was all my fault and I'm grounded for 6 months. Storytime about how I found my uncle sleeping with my best friend. So a little background information. I was 18 at the time and a freshman in college. My uncle was a National Guard, and we were the same age, we went to the same school, and we also had the same friends. And while he was away, I had made one friend that he didn't know about. Her and I became best friends, we got into the same college, and we were in the same dorm room together. Well, the one day my uncle came to my college to surprise me. I ran up to him, I gave him a big hug, and my best friend was super confused because I had never introduced them. And when I introduced them, there was this weird, awkward vibe. So all 3 of us went back to the dorm room, and I asked her if it was okay that he spent the night, because I didn't want to be that person to just invade her space. So she ended up saying yes, and eventually we all got really hungry, and we all wanted Chick-fil-A, so I went and I left them all alone in the room together. Like for part 2. Part 2 about how I found my uncle sleeping with my best friend. So like I said, I went to go get us Chick-fil-A and I left them in the dorm all alone together. While I was waiting in line, I called them to ask what they wanted and nobody answered the phone. So I was like, okay, whatever, it's fine. They're probably just busy talking. So I low-key took a long time because I went to the grocery store to get some cookies. I was just craving them. So then I get back to the dorm room. As soon as I open the door, I see both of them unclothed on top of each other on the bed, doing the nasty. So for some reason, I had a broom and I threw it at my uncle and I went to my friend's apartment that night. And when I told my mom about it, she said that it was my fault because weirdly enough, they praised all the boys in my family. Storytime about how he cheated on his baby mama with me. So a little background information. There was this boy and we're going to call him John. John and I knew each other through one of our mutual friends. Well, 24/7, John would post sad quotes on his Snapchat story because him and his girlfriend had just broken up. So I decided that I was going to be Captain Save-A-Ho and be there for him, telling him it was okay and that everything happens for a reason. Well, eventually John had developed a huge crush on me. Like, he would flirt with me 24/7, sending me all these cute emojis. And of course, my dumbass fell for it. So after talking for a little bit, him and I started dating. Well, the one day I was on Snapchat going through his story, and he was posting a bunch of funny memes on his story, and I was just laughing until I got to the last thing that he posted on his story. It was this picture of a baby girl saying, "I can't wait to meet you from Dada." So with my crazy ass, I jumped on the phone and started cussing him out. And then he goes, "What are you talking about? That's my little sister." Like for part 2. Part 2 about how he cheated on his baby mama with me. So like I said, when I confronted him about it, he said that it was a picture of his baby sister. Always with the Alabama shit, for what reason, I don't know. But he calls me the next day and he starts apologizing about everything. And then he decides to make a new Snapchat account and starts talking to me on there, thinking that I was just gonna block his other account. He posts a picture of his baby mama. So at this point, my Virgo self and I were done with the bullshit. By the way, he's a Gemini, so if that doesn't explain it, I don't know what will. So I start dating my new man, and I commented on all of his posts. I guess I'm not surprised she's not the only bitch you're fucking with. And if you try lying, I'm going to spill the tea. Like, I just think that it's really funny how females just think that their men are so loyal, even when you literally expose their man with every piece of evidence. Well, the girl who sent this in has a special message for all of us. I promise you that men ain't shit. Thank you for listening to my TED Talk.
If you can solve this riddle, you're a genius. There was this woman and she was a serial killer. She would take men on dates and then poison them and kill them. One day, she goes on a date with you. Ooh, but she can't go through with it because she's so in love with you. Eventually, you two end up getting married and you buy a house together. When you buy the house, she claims the basement for her work and she says that you're not allowed to go down there. You say okay and you're happily married. But as time goes on, you get really curious and one day she leaves for work and you decide to go downstairs and see what's down there. When you go downstairs, it's pitch black and you reach around the walls to see if there's a light switch to turn on, but there isn't. As you're feeling around the room, there's a light bulb above you that is unscrewed a little bit. You screw it in a little bit more to turn on the light. Immediately, you see all the dead bodies that she's ever killed and you're in shock as you're looking around for a while, but then you hear her car pull up in the driveway and she's home from work. You quickly unscrew the light bulb, run upstairs, and sit down. When she gets home, she goes downstairs to check on her dead bodies, and she immediately knew that you were in there. How did she know? Pause this video right now because I'm about to say the answer. It was because the light bulb was still hot.
I have a movie idea. Hear me out. A group of young professional divers, you know, the people that go bloop bloop in the ocean, they made it their mission to one day explore the Bermuda Triangle from underwater. The entire movie is filmed by GoPros attached to their equipment. Now this group of divers goes missing, but someone finds the GoPros. The person who found them watches back all of the footage from when they started their dive in the Bermuda Triangle. The craziest stuff happens. And at the end of all the footage, the person watching figures out where they might be and goes looking for them.
Yes, this really did happen. In 2015, a man woke up to a strange post-it note sitting on his desk. On it was a to-do list that he didn't recognize in handwriting that didn't look like his. Since he was up late the night before doing some work, he assumed he must have written out the list when he was half asleep and kind of forgot about it, so he just crumples it up and throws it away. 2 weeks later, he wakes up to dozens of these post-it notes all over his wall, and they're all blank except for one that, in the same weird handwriting, says, "Our landlord isn't letting me talk to you." Now feeling totally freaked out that some crazy person is crawling around his apartment at night, he starts looking for signs of a break-in, but there aren't any. Instead of calling the police, he shares his experience on Reddit asking for help, and one user's comment literally saves his life. Turns out the man was writing the notes to himself and then forgetting, because his brain was slowly dying due to a carbon monoxide leak that was only discovered because a user suggested he install a detector.
I have a movie idea. I'm really excited about this one. Hear me out. Years from now, time traveling is finally invented, but the knowledge of this time traveling must remain top secret. 5 highly classified individuals are selected for a mission. The mission is that they each go back into a selected time where no cameras were invented, and they take a camera and record important moments in history. Now they have 3 important rules that they must follow. Rule 1. Don't talk to anybody. Rule 2, don't touch anything. And rule 3, remain unnoticed. All seemed to be going well with the mission until one guy didn't come back. Not only did he not come back, but a strange woman with his belongings shows up in the present day. Someone hire me, please.
Story time. I babysat a lot of kids in my neighborhood, and there was this one night that I was babysitting a 2-year-old. It was around 10 o'clock at night, so the kid was sleeping, and I was just sitting in the living room. In the living room, there was a big TV, a couch, and then behind me, it was a wall with a giant window. So it was really late at night, I had nothing to do, so I was Snapchatting my friends. If you Snapchat anybody, I'm sure you know that sometimes you Snapchat really fast. You don't even know or look at what you're sending. I was mass snapping all my friends, and then one of them replied 10 minutes later. And he said, "Who's that guy behind you?" And I turned around and no one was there, so I'm like, he's playing a joke on me. But then I get another Snapchat from this friend I had, and she lives all the way across the country. They don't know each other. And she said, "I think there's someone outside." So I was really freaked out because I was alone. There was a giant window behind me. Apparently there was someone outside. I wasn't gonna call the child's parents because I didn't want to freak them out, but I was scared. So then I went around the house, locked all of the doors. Sorry, it's a really long story, like for part 2.
Can you solve this mystery? This is a story of 2 friends who got into an accident while they were camping, but someone is hiding something, and not everything is as simple as it might seem. All the clues to what really happened are hidden in what I'm about to say. So these 2 friends, a young man and woman, went camping together in the woods. The man said that he knew his way around because he went camping there all the time, so he ended up leading the way. They arrived at a long rope bridge that they both had to cross to get to the other side. The woman went first, but something was wrong. One of the boards on the rope bridge came loose. She accidentally stepped through, but managed to grab the rope just in time to save herself from falling. She shouted to her friend for help, but he said that he was too scared to get on the bridge now. She finally pulled herself up to safety, where her friend said, "Are you okay?" She said, "Yeah, I'm fine, but that could have ended up a lot worse." And her friend replied, "You're right, someone should really fix the ropes on the bridge." What really happened here, and who's the one that's hiding something? Can you solve this mystery?
I'm going to start a series of doing my makeup over my own scary childhood stories. Up until I was about 16, I didn't know how to put a barrier up on my own energetic fields, so I used to see a lot of stuff and experience a lot of different dimensions. The first story starts when I was 2. I don't remember it much, but my parents have told me this multiple times. We lived in this little white house. It was very old. My parents used to always hear me laughing and playing in my room with someone, but there was no one in my room. When they asked who I was talking to, I told them it was a little boy named Omar. They thought it was just an imaginary friend, but now that I think back on it, when I was 3 and 4, I did see someone. He was always very kind to me. I would play Barbies and he would play with me. He would draw me pictures.
I would leave my books out for him so he could read while I was at preschool. I would tell him about my days and he would tell me about his. But things started to get really weird once my brother was born, and that is when my parents started to see him too. They believe that this is because he wanted to be the only little boy in the house. Stay tuned for part 2. Here is part 2 of the series of the little boy. If you haven't seen part 1, go watch that first because it won't make sense if you don't watch that. Up until I was 16, I didn't know how to put a barrier up on my own energetic fields, so I used to see a lot of things. When my brother was born, my parents used to sense and see the little boy as well. My mom used to feel his energy sitting in the rocking chair. My brother's mechanical toys used to just start making noise. He started to show up less and less in my room, and every time he would, he kind of scared me. He wasn't himself anymore. He was mad, angry, everything. My parents believe it's just because he wanted to be seen and he was lonely, and now that I had a little brother, I wasn't paying as much attention to the little boy. My mom would wake up to my brother crying in the middle of the night and go check on him, and she would sense something standing next to her. Weeks later, we moved out of that house due to a shooting in our backyard. My old nanny, who lived across the street, told us after we moved out, she would always see something in the window of my room. To this day, Omar still shows up in my dreams.
This is why you should never watch my videos before going to bed. In 1986, a young girl opens her closet to find a man wearing a dress and holding an axe. He grabs her and ties her up, and then walks around the house and does the same thing to the rest of her family. While the guy is ransacking their house, one of the kids breaks free, runs next door, and tells his neighbor. The neighbor calls the cops show up, the family's saved, but the guy is nowhere to be found. The family leaves the house and stays with relatives in hopes that they'll catch this guy before they have to go back. But after a few weeks, they haven't caught him, there aren't any leads, and they say, you know what, we'll go back to our house anyways. As the family's pulling back into their driveway, the father looks up at one of the windows and sees for a split second the head of the man with the dress in their bedroom. They call the police, who go in and find pennies glued to the ceiling and weird writing all over the house, but they can't find this crazy guy. Until one of the officers found a secret crawl space in the basement, where psychotic killer Danny LaPlante had been living for 2 months.
Have you ever seen a painting that looked extremely realistic? Jake was waiting for his mom when he saw a strangely realistic painting, but he made one mistake that would lead to terrifying consequences. During his mom's doctor's appointment, Jake was sitting alone in the hospital waiting room. That's when he saw the painting. It looked so real, almost like a photo. He was promised ice cream if he sat quietly, but he found himself growing more and more curious. He felt like he needed to move closer to the painting, so he got up and walked towards it. The painting was of an old man, but there was something wrong with it. It seemed like the eyes would follow Jake no matter where he'd walk, but soon something even more unbelievable would happen, something no one can explain. The painting, needless to say, made Jake feel creeped out, but he tried not to feel so scared. It was a painting after all. Then Jake leaned in and saw one weird detail. The old man had unusually long fingers and fingernails. A bit later, Jake's mom came out of the doctor's office, but Jake was nowhere to be found. She called him but got no reply. Then she turned around and saw a very realistic painting on the wall. The boy in the painting looked oddly familiar.
I have a movie idea. Hear me out. A woman in her 80s gets in a horrible car accident. Now she lays on the operating table while surgeons try to save her life. When doctors try to reach out to family or friends or anyone for this woman, they realize she had nobody. Some might even say that she's lived a lonely and unfulfilling life. That's so sad. All of a sudden, her heart just stops beating. At this point, she's flatlining. But what she didn't know is that there was a little girl in the operating room next to her. This little girl is only like 6 years old. But then the little girl starts flatlining at the same time as the woman. The woman's eyes suddenly open, but she's in the operating room with nothing in it, except the little girl was in there too. Before she can even say anything, the little girl runs up to her, grabs her hand and says, "I'm ready to go. Please take my place." All of a sudden, the woman wakes up gasping for air. She made it out of surgery, except she woke up as the little girl. Was she given a second chance at life? How will she live it? Someone grab the tissue.
Most people believe these 3 things will save your life. They don't. Let's pretend that you're on vacation with some friends in this cabin, and you hear on the news that there's actually a killer on the loose in the woods surrounding your cabin. What do? Instinctively, you're gonna wanna ditch your friends and just start running into the woods. No shoes, no weapons, no cell phone, no sense of where you're going. But that's actually a terrible idea because the killer is in the woods, and you'd be putting yourself more in harm's way, not less. So you decide to stay put, and then you remember that your friend drove you all to the cabin in their brand new Lamborghini that was working like 5 minutes ago. So why can't you just pile into that and drive away to safety? The problem with that is anytime you're in a cabin in the woods and there's a killer on the loose around your cabin, even if it's a brand new car, it's not gonna start. So don't even go out and try it. You're just sitting in the cabin doing nothing when all of a sudden you feel like someone could be watching you and you wanna turn around and make sure no one is. Don't turn around because if you do, the killer will magically appear behind you.
This woman will never look at sticky notes the same way again. Once a young woman came home to find her house empty. She went to the kitchen to get a snack and found a sticky note left on the fridge. But as soon as she looked at it, she realized something was strange about it. It said there is someone in the house. Assuming it could be her brother, she said, "That's really funny, but the prank's over." No one answered. She walked towards the door, but it was locked. Then she turned around and on the table was another sticky note. It said, "You're not going anywhere." She began to feel scared. She opened the kitchen drawer to try to find something to defend herself, but the drawer was completely emptied. Inside was another sticky note: "You shouldn't play with sharp things." She ran upstairs to her bedroom and locked the door, and quickly called the police and begged them to come as soon as possible. Then all of a sudden the TV turned on by itself. It was loud and static, but on the screen was another note: "Now I have you where I want you." This time the young woman began screaming. Soon the police found her in a corner crying in fear. They searched the house and found no one there. But as soon as the young woman stood up and tried to leave, police found something horrifying. An officer took off a note stuck on the young woman's back and handed it to her. It said, "I was this close."
This is why you should always check under your bed for monsters. In 2012, a young woman who was on the phone with her boyfriend walks downstairs to the lobby of her apartment building, collects her mail, and then heads back up to her room. She sits on her bed to start sifting through the mail when she drops her phone and it falls under the bed. She lies down on the ground to try to reach her arm out to grab her phone when she notices something horrible underneath her bed. A man is lying underneath her bed with his back to her. He's in the fetal position. She manages not to scream. She grabs her phone and says to her boyfriend, "Hey, I gotta go shower, I'll call you back." And she quickly runs into the bathroom, locks the door, turns on the shower, and then jumps out her first floor window. Once she's safely across the street, she calls the police, who quickly arrive, and they go inside and they come out with a deranged, skinny-looking man. Before they take him away, one of the officers walks over to her with a very grim look on his face. He looks at her and he just says, "We found him standing outside of your bathroom holding a knife. He was waiting for you."
Can you solve this mystery? This is about a boy who disappeared at a carnival. Even though he's presumed to be dead, no one could find out exactly how he died, but all the clues are hidden in what I'm about to say. One day the boy arrived at the carnival and came across a man who asked him if he wanted to play a game. The man told him if he won, he'd get $1,000. The rules are simple. There are 10 large metal boxes. Inside one of them is $1,000 prize money. If you can open the right one, then you get the money. But the boxes are too strong to be opened by your hands or even with a hammer. You have to use a blowtorch. The boy asked, "Is there a time limit?" The man said he could take as much time as he wanted, and he'll even help him out. If the boy gave him $5, he will put him right next to the prize money. The boy happily took out his wallet and handed the man $5. There was a mischievous grin on the man's face. The game started. The prize money was right in front of the boy. He could see it, he could touch it. But even though the boy won the game, he would never be able to spend the money, and he died shortly after he won the game. How did the boy die? Can you solve this mystery?
This is why you should never go scuba diving in a big group. This is a picture of Tom and Eileen Lonergan, and on January 25th, 1998, they had no idea what was about to happen to them. They wanted the chance to scuba dive in the largest coral reef system in the world. So they set sail with 26 other people and went 25 miles away from the coast of Queensland, Australia, which was their original location. Tom and Eileen only thought they'd be going scuba diving for 40 minutes and they'd come back up and then they'd go back to their hotel. So after about 40 minutes, everybody boards the boat and they go back to Queensland. The next day, another group of divers go out to the same location and one of the divers found dive weights at the bottom of the ocean. They didn't think anything of it until they couldn't find Tom and Eileen. It had been 2 full days until anybody even noticed that they were gone. The people in the group with them just assumed they were out doing stuff or seeing Australia. People wanted to check on them to see if they were okay, so they went to the Lonergan's hotel room, and sitting outside of their door was their luggage. And that is when everybody realized they left them behind, because it had been 2 days and their luggage was untouched. Running out of time, but part 2 coming right now. Part 2 of Tom and Eileen Lonergan's disappearance. So yes, they had gone scuba diving in the largest coral reef system in the world with a very big group. And after 2 days of nobody seeing them, they started to get worried, so they ran to their hotel room, and their luggage had been untouched, sitting outside of their door. A massive search went underway, and both air and sea teams went to go look for the couple for 3 days. Rescue members found their diving gear ashore along with a dive slate. A dive slate is basically an easel or whiteboard that you can write on underwater. The slate said, "To anyone who can help us, we have been abandoned on Agincourt Reef, Reef 25, January 1998, 3 p.m. Please help us, come to rescue us, before we die. Help." But sadly, Tom and Eileen's bodies were never discovered. Like any group, it's way safer to go scuba diving in a group of like 3 people because it's a lot easier to see that you're missing one person because there's only 2 of you left. But this was a group of 26 people. So whose fault do you think it is, and do you think they're really dead? Do you think it was the captain or the scuba diving company's fault? Do you think it was the group's fault, or do you think it was Tom and Eileen's fault? Some people think this was a murder-suicide because in Tom's diary, he talked a lot about suicide. What do you think happened?
This is why you should never open your door for strangers. In 2013, a woman let her dog out to use the bathroom one more time before bed. After only a few minutes, she starts hearing scratching on her door, which is typically the sound her dog makes when he's ready to come in. But it just seemed way too soon for him to be done being outside. So she decides to look through the peephole to make sure it really is her dog. But what she sees is terrifying. A deranged looking man is right outside her door, staring intently at her door handle, waiting for it to turn open. As she's looking in horror, unable to do anything, he starts scratching at the door as hard as he can, never leaving his gaze from the door handle. She manages to stifle a scream, she backs away and realizes her dog is still outside. So she goes to the side window, but there's no sign of her dog, and so she goes back to the door to see if maybe the man's moved. He hasn't moved, his mouth is open, and he's staring directly at the peephole. Then he turns around and walks away. With the man gone, she discovers her dog unharmed, his leash had just been cut. But that means he had a knife. Be careful what you put in your body. In 2014, a couple returned to their home to find it trashed in baffling ways. There was lotion all over the door handles, all of their shoes had had their soles ripped off of them, and someone had dumped an entire can of paint all over the toilet. Despite the obvious break-in, the police come and can't find any evidence of theft, so they leave thinking the couple's not in danger anymore. That night, the couple hears scratching underneath their bed and what sounds like a crying animal. Not wanting to find out what it was, they leave and call the cops, who come right back and start investigating the house, and they make a startling discovery in their bedroom. Wedged underneath the couple's bed was this 90-pound tiny little woman carrying a huge butcher's knife and a hypodermic needle. As they're taking this crazy lady away in handcuffs, one of the officers comes over to the couple and is like, so she was high on meth, and for at least 2 hours, she had been burrowing a hole in the underside of your mattress with that knife to get to you.
Am I the asshole for having my wedding ceremony in sign language? I'm 24 female, deaf, and growing up, my parents got me bilateral cochlear implants and forced me into mainstream school. Never taught me sign language and never immersed me into my culture as a deaf person. They were actually pretty against me using ASL at all. Well, I took ASL in high school against my parents' wishes and then got into a deaf university. Although I couldn't sign fluently when I started, I finally felt accepted and understood. The deaf community was nothing but welcoming. I became fluent in ASL, and after a few months, I stopped wearing my processors completely as there was no need for them anymore. I honestly didn't realize how alone I had felt until I didn't feel that way anymore. I met my fiance at college. He is from a very large family of deaf people, and everyone is fluent in sign. We've been together 4 years now. He proposed last May. We've been planning the wedding and have decided to have it fully.
I really need to let you know. Regrets been my friend too long. Too long. So fine on. Come as a beach so blue, where the waves come back to you. Always back to you. Can feel sand between my toes. Sitting around like Jack Sparrow. Let me try to explain, I came here to drink it all away, still drink it all away. Swear I'm not lying. Then I saw you sitting over there. It's been a couple years. Hey, what's up with you tonight? Perdí mi número, puedo tener lo tuyo, Savannah. Cause you see, it should have been you, should have been me, it should have been us for life.
Can you solve this mystery? This is a story about a young girl whose brother confessed to killing their parents, but things are not as they seem. All the clues to what really happened are hidden in what I'm about to say. So one day, this young girl decided to tell her friend about the terrible tragedy. Her friend asked about what happened to her brother after the confession. She said he got arrested, went to trial, and eventually was found guilty and sentenced to death by lethal injection. During the execution, her brother never said a word. He gave no explanation and just stared at her blankly as they gave him the injection. The young girl admitted after that she couldn't eat or sleep. She had so many questions, but no one left to give her answers. She tried to block out the terrible memories and suffered from depression and even amnesia. The friend suggested she go to a psychic to find some answers, so she did. She asked, "What drove my brother to lose his mind?" And the psychic said, "Your brother was always perfectly sane." The girl asked, "So then why did my brother kill our parents?" And the psychic said, "Your brother was only responsible for the death of one person." Suddenly, the girl understood everything. She broke down crying. What really happened to this family? Can you solve this mystery?
Am I the asshole for taking my older brother to a restaurant instead of taking him to the wedding? I, male 21, have an older brother, Adam, 27, and he's wheelchair bound due to a motorcycle accident that caused a spinal cord injury. He was living with his ex-fiance, but my parents took him after she said she couldn't do it anymore. Last week, my parents got a wedding invitation from Adam's ex-fiance's parents. Her family and my family are really close. I got involved after Dad said Adam had no choice but to go. I asked him to respect Adam's opinion, but Dad called me an enabler and that they get to veto his opinion since they do so much for him. The day of the wedding, I went to my parents' house, told them I wanted to go with Adam to the wedding and drive him there myself. They said, okay, told me to follow them. Instead of following them, I drove Adam to a restaurant out of town. We had a great time there. His frown turned into a joyful smile.
Oh my God, worth it.
Seeing him like this made me feel relieved. Once I turned my phone on, my dad...
I have a movie idea. Hear me out. There's this young guy. He's fresh out of college, so he's like 23, 24. One thing you should know about him is that he is very, very smart. Unlike someone I know. So he has a desk job with the FBI. He's working that 9-to-5 life. But that's not his dream, though. His dream is to work for the CIA. He's had a few interviews with them, but they don't seem that interested in him. But here's where things take a turn. One morning before work, he wakes up with a folded note in his hand. The note says, 3 days from now, you will be framed for murder. Someone you know has been killed, but hasn't been found yet. If you show this to anyone or tell anyone, all the evidence against you will be turned in. You have 3 days to prove you're innocent. 3 days to catch me. Good luck. Who is dead? Who broke into his apartment and left this note? Is this some weird test done by the CIA? Or will he be taking the blame for murder? Somebody please give me a job.
If you ever want to wear a wig, don't do what she did. Talia bought a wig one day that didn't fit, but instead of returning it, she did something that quickly became terrifying. She came up with an unusual idea. This was her first mistake. She searched for ways to alter the wig herself. Then she went into her mother's room, took out a sewing kit, and began working. But Talia actually decided to put the wig on first and sew it in front of a mirror. She thought this would make sure the size was perfect. Afterwards, she was actually really satisfied with the result. Then that night, Talia went to take the wig off, but the wig seemed to feel much tighter than before. But she had school early tomorrow, so with one pull, she took the wig off. Then, without looking, she put it in her closet. That night, she woke up to a wet sound ringing in her ear. She tried to go back to sleep, but realized that her dog had come onto her bed. She pet her dog and went back to sleep. It wasn't a big deal. But the next morning, she noticed something strange in her closet. The wig didn't look the way it did before. It was covered in pieces of blood and skin. Then Talia went into the bedroom and turned around. She realized that she had sewn her own scalp into the wig, then ripped it off. In the back of her head, she could see her own skull. Then she realized why there was a wet sound ringing in her ears last night, and she began screaming.
4 years ago, I broke up with my boyfriend Dan, but I decided not to tell him. Dan had been coming around to my apartment and my work even though I repeatedly told him I was not interested. I'd been planning to move to get away from him and I didn't want him to have an excuse to be in my life. So when I moved away, I didn't tell him I was pregnant and I didn't put his name on the birth certificate. Last year when my daughter was 2, I got married and my husband adopted her. Dan and my sister were still friends in high school, and since Dan still lives in my hometown, they occasionally catch up. A week ago, Dan called me and said that he found out through my sister that I'd been pregnant not long after we broke up. He was furious that I had never told him and that the baby might be his and accused me of keeping him away from his daughter. I told my husband and he's furious that I never told him about my daughter's father. He was always under the impression that her father hadn't wanted to be in the picture, and he's been cold to me ever since I told him. I do not ever want Dan around my daughter, and I think I was justified in my decision to protect her from him. But Dan keeps calling and asking to see his daughter, and my husband says I betrayed both him and Dan by lying about this.
Usually when my clients arrive for their appointment, they're not wearing any makeup. But this girl wore makeup to the appointment just to have me take it off and then do her makeup again. I thought that was a little strange, but after I removed her makeup, I saw her nose. The tip of her nose was bright red and even a little bit deformed. It looked like a really, really bad sunburn. I tried to avoid the area when I started doing her makeup, but eventually I had to put makeup on her nose. And when I did, it was just not working. Her skin was literally peeling off. The makeup would not stay. So that's when I asked her, is there something going on with your nose that I should know about? Let me also just say that at this point, it was starting to swell and was noticeably more red than it was when she got there. That's when she told me that she had recently been out of the country for a mission trip and that she had picked up a flesh-eating bacteria, which had affected her nose. Then she told me not to worry because she had been on antibiotics for months and that the irritation on her nose was just her skin healing. For once, I was horrified, not my client.
Let this be a reminder that there really are monsters out there. In 2007, a woman living right near a prison in California got home late one night and went right to bed. Around midnight, she woke up to footsteps on her first floor, assumed it was her roommate, so she goes downstairs to say hi. She yells out to her roommate, who doesn't say anything, and then in walks this giant man who she doesn't recognize. She runs upstairs, jumps in her closet into the crawl space and hides. As she's helplessly tucked away in this little crawl space, trying not to make any sound, all she hears is this giant man sprinting around her house, running into walls, flipping furniture and screaming in frustration because he can't find her. Finally, after several hours, she slowly opens the crawl space back up, crawls out and gets her phone off the nightstand and calls police. As she's telling the police her story, she describes the person who had broken in and they stop her and say, "Ma'am, go back in the crawl space and stay there. We'll be there as soon as we can." It turned out a 6'11" convicted murderer had escaped the prison and was still on the loose.
I have a movie idea. One day, a little girl is befriended by a woman in her 20s. Whenever the young girl needs to make a somewhat important decision in her life, the woman will show up, but only when no one else is around. As the years go by and the girl starts to grow up, she soon realizes that no one else has ever seen this woman that has become such an important person in her life. Little does she know that that woman is her from the future, and all of the choices that she helped the girl make were to avoid the same mistakes that she made that led to her death. BRB, gotta call Netflix.
This is why you should never look through someone else's things. Once there was a girl named Ryoko who had a really weird roommate in college, but when she tried to look through her things, she found something that terrified her. Ryoko's roommate was named Yuki, and Yuki was someone who always kept to herself. She didn't speak much and she rarely left the room. But after living with her for a while, Ryoko realized that Yuki would always sneak out in the middle of the night and not come back for a really long time. This made Ryoko really curious and maybe just a little bit suspicious. So one day Ryoko decided to follow her. She pretended to be asleep and waited until Yuki left. Then Ryoko waited a few more minutes and followed Yuki, always staying in the shadows to not be noticed. After about 30 minutes, they ended up at the cemetery. Ryoko watched as Yuki leaned over a grave, embracing it and laughing hysterically. This scared Ryoko so much that she ran away terrified. She came home, went to bed, and waited for Yuki to come back. But the next morning, things became even more strange. Ryoko woke up and heard that last night something unbelievable happened to her roommate. Something that no one can explain. Follow for part 2. This is why you should never look through someone else's things. After Ryoko followed her roommate Yuki one night to a cemetery, she found Yuki laughing hysterically over a grave. She got scared and ran home, but Yuki never came back. The next morning, Ryoko found out something terrifying. Yuki's body was found by the cemetery the next morning. She had unalived herself right after Ryoko ran away. It turns out the grave that she was sneaking out every night to go see belonged to her ex-boyfriend, and she never told anyone. Ryoko was shocked. She felt sorry for Yuki, but also thought that it was really strange. Why was Yuki laughing? A few days pass and Yuki's belongings are still in their room. It seemed like she didn't have any family or friends coming to get it either. Then she found something she never should have. Ryoko flipped through Yuki's things until she found her diary, and when she flipped to the last page, she froze. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. On the last page, written in red ink, it said, "I know you saw me."